Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Hi, I'm Kevin Bayuk, a partner and worker owner at Lift Economy. My guest today is Joshua Prieto. Joshua is co-founder of Seeds of Dow, an education and support platform for impact entrepreneurs building regenerative enterprises. I'm looking forward to learning about that and hearing more about that. Joshua, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So I'm wondering if you could start by just telling us our story. Tell the Next Economy Now listeners, how did you get into what you're doing today and what brought you to this conversation?
Yeah, so it really actually starts off with my wife and I being new parents in a new house in kind of an urban scenario. And we were kind of looking for a way we were determining if I was going to go get a master's degree, an MBA, and where that would be. I was thinking of doing an MBA in California or somewhere largely in a city area. So we were looking at these deals or these opportunities to live in a certain area that had really, really high rent typically, but that we could get into an area with high rent in a very low income while I was a student. And so my wife was looking at these opportunities if you've ever looked at the storage units where you manage the storage unit, right? And we had a young kid at the time, our first child. And so she was looking into these things. And for whatever reason, I'm at work and I come home and I figure she's going to give me a download on some of the opportunities that she had found for the day. And I come home from work. I'm still going to school in my bachelor's as well. And so I'm kind of in between getting home and then going off to night school. But I come in and she's really excited about something. And she's like, you're probably going to hate me for this, but I found something that has just changed my world and I want to try it out. And I think it's going to kind of disrupt, and it kind of threw me off a little bit. And I'm like, okay, share with me. And both Emily and I were kind of sustainability nerds at the time. We hadn't found out about regeneration or permaculture and any of that at this point. But she had stumbled upon looking for affordable homes, essentially. She stumbled upon earthen building and specifically super adobe or earth bag. She's like, I love this stuff. And I've been investigating it all day. And she just kind of went down this rabbit hole of how could you build this home, right? And so she was even getting to the point of seeing how you get it past code or if there's codes for this type of building. And I was like, okay, well, you really went down this rabbit hole and it was completely different from what I thought I was going to hear. And I'm like, yes. But I got really excited and I said, yes, let's do it. I don't even know why I said it, but it's let's do something like this. It just seemed right. And we actually chased that rabbit hole for several years, trying to build an off-grid home that was earthen built. But as we chased down that rabbit hole, we found things like permaculture and regenerative agriculture and regenerative land restoration and all of these different things. And it just became this whole nother world. Well, during that whole process, I was having kind of a split life, I guess you could say, because my career was and I had a deep love for entrepreneurship from the very beginning. Knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur as a kid, but I was going to school for entrepreneurship was my degree. I was getting myself involved in a bunch of early startups with friends. And I really found a niche for myself and a skill set in marketing, branding, and messaging, right? And where I kind of landed as a career was in this growth marketing world. How do businesses really start to get this trajectory of that hockey stick moment, after they've been through a valley of death and they're needing to get out of this situation, and they're needing to see great growth and really quickly. And so this would be in the cases of people that were getting startup funding, early pre-seed, Series A funding. I started getting into this world of marketing, and it was actually all alongside this other world of trying to build this home. And we actually eventually ended up in Montana, trying to build this off-grid homestead while I was consulting businesses and marketing. We were also trying to build this off-grid homestead, right? For 3 years, we tried this. We failed miserably. A lot of reasons just because we were just overtaxed and didn't have a community and didn't have ways that we could learn because we didn't really know what the heck we were doing. We were just passionate about it and started learning about it and dove straight into it, like many in the regenerative world that kind of don't come from a farming background or a multi-generational land owning background, right? So I really kind of lived this two-world life for a really long time. And we actually had a failed attempt on building that off-grid farmstead. We kind of said it's either the marriage or this farm, because it was really just kind of dragging us down. And we had this big pit of like, how do we keep this going? Trying to do it all cash and bootstrap this farm. And it was just really hard. It was really hard. Living off-grid was hard enough. And then trying to build this off-grid homestead was even harder. And then we decided we'd move back to the city at that point and said, maybe we'll take a sabbatical from this farm idea, right? We'll go back to the city where I'm from, in Salt Lake City. And I started working in my normal consulting, but I wanted to start a branding agency. And I did that I found a partner who was this wonderful creative, had won awards in filmography and did these wonderful videos and was a wonderful storyteller. And we both got into this branding agency thinking that we would create beautiful things for these businesses and get them these hockey stick moments and high growth situations. So I was again living this kind of double life, very much focusing on what you would call like that. They call it the Silicon Slopes area in Salt Lake City because it's a huge growth period for that area in tech, right? So we were finding all these tech companies and I'm building this branding agency. And I felt like I was in the wrong place again with this business. And I wanted to do something that was regenerative. I wanted to work with businesses that I felt like were moving towards that regenerative economic model rather than a lot of the businesses that were needing that high growth hockey stick moment were actually, in my view, needing to see a lot of degrowth in the industry. You know, we didn't need to see these consumeristic brands and tech companies hit these hockey stick moments because we already had all of this, and what was it leading to, right? So that was kind of our moment to start Seeds of Dow. I started transitioning my way from the branding agency. This was a few years ago now. We started the Seeds of Dow podcast. And it was really my wife and I, who's also a marketer, a creative, who was a creative director for our branding agency. We started just having conversations together about the type of businesses that we wanted to work with, the type of businesses that we wanted to see in the world. And we felt like there weren't really a lot of those. So we had to kind of catch them early and see if we can find more and more entrepreneurs and develop the right type of entrepreneurs to create a more regenerative economy. So we were very grassroots in thinking of this. And so we just started talking to people. That's the whole part of the podcast was market research to understand what our place was in the world of the next regenerative economy. And you kind of put it in your business and podcast, the next economy, right? We kind of have that same view there. We want to transition towards this regenerative economy. So that's the kind of the beginnings of how this all happened. There's a lot of details on what we're working on, and we're still young in our growth and understanding, but really it's always been around and formalized around us kind of trying to mesh what our skill set was in marketing, branding, and entrepreneurship with what the world was needing to move towards this regenerative economy. And we felt so misaligned, and I think many of us do, that we had to really try to figure out where our skill sets could actually be of benefit in that transition. Because in so many ways, I was told, well, you just need to stop doing growth marketing. But this is this career and skill set that I've had for over 10 years now. You know, I understand it. It's how I provided for my family. And it's also something that we realized that was actually deeply needed for businesses and probably only needed for the regenerative movement and what's now a new industry of regenerative entrepreneurship, right? We don't need to see other businesses grow, but we really, truly need to see regenerative enterprises grow. So yeah, that's the beginnings of this.
Thank you for sharing that journey. There's a few things that stood out. Maybe I can reflect it back. Some of the pieces that I heard were you had this impulse, this desire, this aspiration to live in a different way. You know, you and your partner, your wife, kind of, how do we live in partnership with the land, develop a homestead, you know, meet some of our needs as producers, grow food, build shelter with our hands. I love that you got into earth bag and some of the super adobe kind of natural building kind of that was a strike of passion. That's an interesting pattern that I've seen. Feel like, whoa, there's another way to build shelter and it's accessible and something deep.
Or it should be successful. It feels like it should be, but it's really not.
Right? Yeah.
Current building code, and we have to go off and look like we're these hippies out living in these rural areas a lot of times to do those things.
Yeah, it has that invitation of being accessible, and the materials are available, local, inexpensive, the skills, the labor, some skills that you could pick up. But yeah, one of my teachers talks about the underregulated world and the overregulated world. And in the permissibility of the overregulated world, it's really difficult. It's inaccessible to actually take our determination into our own hands and build a shelter for ourselves. But I love that you had that impulse and that aspiration and that you discovered a few things. One of the key things that I think you said that could be informative to anybody else who shares that aspiration is that you found that you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like kind of the going it alone as a couple or a young family to try and do it without a community or a village is extraordinarily challenging. Maybe, a big enough barrier to, pivot and say, let's reassess how we're going to go about this. And gifts you see as needed and being discerning about need to grow. I'm curious, as you entered into these conversations, this relationship building through Seeds of Tao, what you learned.
Yeah, the community aspect was huge for us and something that we didn't really recognize beforehand. I feel like we should have. And in a lot of ways, I think what we were thinking is that you start building something and people will come, right? We were building something unique and it was different. And we felt like we could gain traction and gain momentum in our area around a new way of doing something. And that was kind of a hope. We were going to document it and see, that this earthen building thing and this thing that we learned on the way, permaculture and regenerative farming and agriculture, this is a new way of living. And we actually started, we tried doing like a barn raising. We were in a very rural community trying to see if people would kind of come and help us with our first build. And we did get people to come the first couple days. And then we started seeing people flounder and people coming sometimes, but not other times. And it was just this really, really difficult situation. A lot of reasons was people had no clue what we were doing. And we didn't necessarily have community that was excited about the types of things that we were doing, right? They were like, oh, this is novel. This is kind of cool. But they weren't actually truly interested in it. And that was one really big concern for us as we started doing this, is that we were all alone, that there was no one there around us that could help us. And because we started off in a place that we really didn't necessarily look to try and find the community, we just kind of went in starting off alone and then trying to build a community around it. It was really difficult. And yeah, I look back at that time and think, yes, that's not the way to go about it. It's about building community first before you actually have to do anything. And that's like the first part is like understanding, networking, getting to know who's out there. And over time, we've developed this really amazing network, mostly international though, but that's the challenge,
Yeah. So the place-based consciousness of a group to get together in a region to have that supportive mutual endeavor is still something that's emerging. But you found this global network through that Seeds of Tao and those relational conversations you were having. I'm curious if you could share, what were you learning? What are some of the key insights that you've had from all those conversations you've been having?
Yeah. So we started the podcast. Well, I have to go look back and see exactly. And we did take like a break from the podcast for a little bit, but we started the podcast about a year before we actually like really launched operations for our business, right? And started actually offering some early services and products in regards to what we had found. And initially, we were just looking to see who was out there in the regenerative space and what they were talking about. And so it was pretty much anybody and everybody that we could talk to in the beginning, right? And it started off with a practitioner here, mostly small gardener, hobbyist in permaculture, and then realizing that there was this really cool trend of people learning about something, like say that someone taking their PDCs. There's plenty of people, and this pattern kind of fell in place, is like people are taking their PDCs, but they were coming from different backgrounds. And the PDC is a permaculture design course. If those in the audience don't hear that often, but they would take their PDCs and they would be in, like, say, the tech sector or in housing or real estate or something. And they would take their PDC and then go back to their career, right? And they wouldn't know what they could do with it besides just gardening. But they had this new understanding, this kind of new awakening of something different that they could be doing. And a lot of them then started going on a path that like Emily and I had done when we first were awakened to this. And they started like trying to create a business or a lifestyle around it. And there was all of these early stage kind of entrepreneurs because they couldn't find a career in it. They couldn't find anything. So they actually had to like pick it up. And a lot of times they were picking it up using the skill sets that they had prior. So if they were a tech person, they were starting a tech company that was still related to permaculture and the regenerative movement in some way, right? And so you would see someone start up a beekeeping app or someone start up, like all of these different things. And because they were finding ways to adapt where they currently were and move towards where they wanted to be. And that was really exciting. It was something that I was trying to find in my own life during this process and during this transition away from my branding agency. So that was a lot of the early community that we were finding, is people of all shapes and sizes really truly wanting to make this transition and then going out there and trying to do it through some type of entrepreneurial endeavor.
That's wonderful. So there's community there that kind of aligned and similar in the journey that you're taking. So there's an awareness and aspiration, and then this, how can I bring my skills and experience that might have been cultivated in the business as usual degenerative culture, but how can I bring those skills to bear towards that livable future that I'm now passionate about? And I'm sure there's some frustration that you encounter too, of people struggling to, make things work. What kind of challenges have you seen, or are there any stories you want to highlight of things that you think listeners would be excited to know about that Seeds of Tao has helped in terms of that community, see some successes and people break through and be able to cultivate that lifestyle that is contributive to their in alignment with their values?
Yeah, I think we're all just kind of working towards and figuring it out. We will have these epiphanies and then realize that we're not alone in these spaces and that we can work together on these businesses and projects and passions and future ways of living. I think a lot of it really comes down to when you have that initial knowledge and understanding, and what we were starting to see with a lot of the people that were coming onto the podcast and then really started to end up be what we were focusing on trying to support them in their efforts, was that there was still there's a couple of things here that I kind of want to unpack. But one part of it is everybody that has been in the regenerative movement and permaculture movement and for a decent amount of time really has, at one point or another, has an super aversion to anything that is business as usual or anything that is in this current economic system, right? And so we try to get away from it. And in reality, the pattern is actually really destructive. The current system, yes, is broken and we're trying to work towards a different way, but we have to actually be involved in here and now to actually move beyond it. One of those things is, just being able to be sustainable, to provide an income, to find a way to work within this current economic system, to provide for our families. And a lot of times we have this aversion to capitalism or whatever, that we can't even sell our product. We can't sell a service. We can't actually build a business around what we're doing because we have an aversion to it. And so what we were finding is people were wanting to start these businesses, but then they would get in and they would have all these false belief structures around how they would actually start this business, right? About how they would market it, how they would build a product or service that was valuable for the market, and how they would maintain business operations. And they were kind of fighting against themselves because they also couldn't try to live in this system, but not be a part of the system, right? And I think we have to be able to live in this system without becoming a part of it, right? In order to make this transition. So that's a challenge that we found. And we realized that we could support in that in a few different ways, because we did a bunch of surveys, we interviewed a lot of people, and did our market research while we were doing this, like a whole year prior. We kind of took it as our time, the permaculture principle, observe and interact, and taking the year on the land is kind of what we did with the podcast. We took a year of observing and interacting with these entrepreneurs. And then what we gained from that understanding is that there was these patterns. There was patterns of not understanding finance and funding engines. There was a pattern of misunderstanding of messaging and marketing. And those are basic patterns for almost every business in general. But then there was these patterns of that was very unique to the regenerative movement, is that there's these external forces and flows that are often working against these entrepreneurs that make that valley of death moment of trying to start up a business even longer, even harder, even more difficult than someone that is in a high growth sector or industry, right? And so we started recognizing these patterns, and then we started saying, let's start creating and bringing in and inviting educational partners to create courses to help these entrepreneurs through these challenges that they're expressing difficulty in. And that's kind of where we started off. Let's build this online course platform that's bringing in entrepreneurs that are actually in the regenerative realm, building these types of businesses in different models, whether it's a cooperative or a family generational farm or all sorts of different kind of walks of different regenerative business, coming in and sharing their knowledge and kind of putting together the pieces of solving these challenges and these patterns that come up as we're trying to work through these businesses. So that was kind of what we kind of came into. And then we started realizing that obviously that's just the first part of it, is just this understanding, gaining knowledge, but then you have to go out and act and do. And that was a pattern that was very much across the board. I've worked with entrepreneurs my entire career. And that is the biggest challenge that a lot of them have, is just getting stuff done, accomplishing goals, right? And so we very much saw that in this kind of group that we were starting, this community that we were starting to build, and started hosting think tanks and the beginning of incubator programming to actually help them work through their challenges, accomplish goals, and be held accountable to the work that they're doing. And so that's kind of starting the kind of second kind of phase of what we've been building out, is incubation and cohort programming. And then finally, kind of going back to, because we're few and far between regenerative entrepreneurs and those that believe in that ideal of a new regenerative economy, and we're spread out internationally, that global movement really does want to work actually in their bioregion and make changes in their bioregion. And we understand that's the only way that we're able to move towards a new regenerative economy is bioregionally. We can't have these big global international businesses. We have to find ways that we can collaborate and build the community that, honestly, Emily and I never had when we were out in the middle of rural Montana trying to build this off-grid farmstead, right? So kind of coming back full circle, the needs that we were seeing and that we were getting fed back to this, and that these entrepreneurs were saying is like, I have to make change in my community because I feel like that's the only place that regenerative change can be made, right? And that's almost across the board. Even if the business is doing work internationally, they still have a focus in the bioregions that they're affecting.
So one thing I just wrote and want to reflect on is, that initial tension. So here's somebody who maybe takes a permaculture design certificate training, or they get animated about, I want to be living in alignment with my values. And maybe they become aware of how harmful and destructive how they were raised in terms of the business as usual economy and the food system and, fossil fuel energy, and how unsustainable and ecocidal the kind of business as usual culture is. And so they're like, I need to do something different. And there can be almost an antipathy, or like I want to get away from money, business transactions. Why can't we just do producer culture, off-grid, gift economy, sharing, things that I know are more alive and vibrant? And then there's this disillusioning process of like, wow, that's really hard. The infrastructure, the means of being able to cultivate that lifestyle are challenging in the context of the existing system. And there's this like sobering moment of like, how am I going to do it? And it's very difficult to do alone. And so what you're doing is getting people together to say like, hey, that hatred or that antipathy for the existing system, there's a lot of valid, energy there. And how can we, evolve using our skills and experiences to compose with and say, let's incrementally, maybe in some cases, or some cases in a step function, let's change our lifestyle, let's simplify so that our needs to interact with the existing system are less. So that might be people who are doing more homesteading, who are living smaller, traveling less, staying within their region, growing some of their own food, meeting some of their own needs through their own production. And at the simultaneously, if you still need to mediate some of your needs through income, let's take those skills and, start and grow organizations and enterprises where you could produce goods and services in ways that are in alignment with your values. And then, intersect with the business as usual economy in ways that are at least more closely in alignment with your values. So that might be, instead of a corporation that's hoarding wealth to the owners, it could be a worker-owned cooperative or a multi-stakeholder cooperative in terms of its structure, or in terms of like manipulative marketing to coerce people into transactions for growth. It could be actually transparent and honest and connective and relational. And so different ways of using messaging or finance or structures. And so you're providing some educational tools and experiences in a community for these people who have had this disillusioning moment to find their way through towards living closer in alignment with their values. And moreover, you're connecting them with each other. And maybe that is an international community, but there is this kind of alignment that the bioregion, the place-based type of community, is where ultimately the change happens. So they might have goods or services that get exchanged across bioregions in terms of how they're producing and sharing, distributing today, but finding these connections in place to build that infrastructure to make it easy for the next person who takes a permaculture design certificate training and has that moment of like, I need to change my life, to make it easier for them, because you didn't have that luxury when you and your wife said, we're going to go homestead in rural Montana. You didn't have the luxury of that being easy and self-evident and like, here's how you do it. And here's the community to come help you build that. That wasn't there. And so your Seeds of Tao is working to create that type of place-based community so that others will actually have that kind of infrastructure. It's very honorable, a beautiful journey that you're on. I'm curious what's next. Yeah.
The what's next is kind of this multi-generational thing. We understand, Emily and I, and those that we're working with, those that we're partnering with, we're working with actually 2 other accelerator programs, business accelerator programs, earlier stage as well, and kind of coming together to start to build some of these out. One of those is Regen Earth Studio, who we're doing their first convergence, and we're trying to pick 2 within that studio. It's kind of a do tank where we're trying to pick 2 projects that are land-based projects that are built around a business that are meant for regenerative land building, regenerative real estate development. And so we're picking those 2 projects, and then we're getting to work to have these entrepreneurs come together to help lift up and build these businesses up, right? And so we know that this is going to take time to start doing this, but we got to get these communities started, and then the businesses around those communities to be implemented. So multi-generationally, I hope that, my children or their children can pick up this type of information and say, yes, I do want to live in this type of community, and I do want to be able to trade services and provide for my own family in a way that is equitable, that's fair, that's regenerative. And so when we take this, we're here in Panama, by the way, as I'm speaking with you. And right now, it's a very unique situation for Panama. We don't know what's going to be happening. The government has actually been shut down, or the country, I should say, has been shut down for several weeks for protests against mining, a very extractive open pit mine that's actually producing 1% of the world's copper, has been in Panama for a number of years and really kind of destroying this very biodiverse corridor, right? And so you have this very extractive system working against, but the hope is that if we can, in this generation or the next, have these bioregional hubs, and say you have a bioregional hub here in Panama that's kind of working in the Central American region to bring these entrepreneurs together, to start having these conversations. This person has this type of business. This person has this type of business. How can we collaboratively work together? Do we need to start another organization to solve this problem over here? Or whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit, and start to work at these different types of models that are very oftentimes experimental, but they're also based in traditions that have been with us for all of humanity, right? Indigenous wisdom, just ways of living that we've kind of forgotten. And now we're trying to find a new way to kind of mesh those in. And so here in Panama, we kind of hope to build our first bioregional hub. And that's kind of what's next for what we're doing, where we can host retreats, where we can help people to come together, entrepreneurs to work through and start projects together, whether it's a new business or helping an existing business and enterprises to grow towards a new regenerative economy in their bioregion. So we kind of say our mission is to create regenerative economies in every bioregion, right? And so our focus is if we can begin to do that here in Panama, that I can partner with my friends in the States, with my friends in other areas that have their own bioregional hubs, and start duplicating these types of models where we're coming together as entrepreneurs, grassroots style, and helping us to lift up this economy from the people that are willing to take on the risk to create change. That's really what an entrepreneur is. They're willing to take on the risk to create some type of change. And a lot of times, the way that we've been taught prior, and you know, because you're creating an MBA for entrepreneurs and business people that are trying to look at things differently, right? That we are taught this certain way, but if we're taught to build these regenerative enterprises early on and to do it in community and collaboratively in our bioregions, we can see this kind of grassroots movement towards this new regenerative economy. So that's what's next for Seeds of Dow.
Very excited to see that as it evolves, and for Next Economy Now listeners to support as they can. Are there any other things that you want to share with us or final thoughts for this conversation?
Yeah, well, those that are listening are interested in coming together and being a part of this global regenerative entrepreneurial movement. We're just a small part in it, and you're a part in it as well, Kevin. But come join us for a monthly think tank that we do. It's a free event. It's on the first Wednesday of the month, and we do it. It's a 2-hour think tank that we do. What is that Pacific time? Well, if you go to our website, you'll find out the times for your time zone. I should say it that way, right? So yeah, go ahead and join us for that. We have some marketing courses currently available for helping to create messaging and marketing that's done in a more equitable and fair way. I would say we're trying to dub it regenerative marketing. And so there's that course that's available. We're working with other partners to help you in areas of your own personal development, of being an entrepreneur, of finding the financing and funding for your business. Some other areas that we've seen is team development and operations development. So we're building those educational partners. So another kind of ask for the world is, if you're an entrepreneur in this regenerative realm and you have knowledge to share with others, come join us in this education platform as well to support other entrepreneurs that are out there building regenerative enterprises.
Wonderful. Thank you for that invitation. I'm going to try and show up and see if I can be helpful as well. Great. I really appreciate your time, Joshua. I really appreciate your journey, and thanks for sharing with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Before you go, we wanted to let you know that our spring cohort of the Next Economy MBA begins on March 26th. If you're an entrepreneur seeking to create a business that works for all life, a member of a team looking to transition your organization into one that is more regenerative and democratic, or someone who's considering a career or livelihood transition in embodiment with your values, we designed this course for you. Over this 9-month learning journey, you'll have the chance to learn practical skills around business and life design based on our work with over 250 social enterprises. In addition to live sessions, you can deepen your experience and practice with special sessions, affinity groups, and connections with over 500 alumni who have participated in the course. Interested in learning more? Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to view our course curriculum and sign up for a free intro with one of our facilitators. If you're ready to sign up, you can use the code PODCASTMBA to save 10% on tuition. We hope you'll join us.